Life often unfolds in unexpected ways, leading us down paths we never imagined. Before I found myself in the quiet solitude of my family farm, I was just another face in the bustling world, struggling to keep my marriage afloat while working tirelessly to provide a stable life. My days were a haze of bus routes, passengers, and routine, but the nights were lonelier than I dared admit. Somewhere along the line, I lost the connection I once cherished with my wife, Natalie. She was the center of my world, and her betrayal left me adrift. It was during those turbulent years that I made choices I can't undo. Anger and heartbreak clouded my judgment, culminating in an incident that changed the trajectory of my life forever. Prison was a harsh teacher, but it was also a place of clarity. It taught me resilience and forced me to confront my own shortcomings. By the time I returned home, the man who once clung to fleeting dreams of happiness was gone, replaced by someone seeking solace in simplicity and isolation. A philosopher once said that humanity is always hopeful for a brighter future, though I doubt he envisioned someone like me when making that observation. I sat in my dimly lit kitchen, chewing on a cold steak paired with crackers and milk, a habit more for comfort than health. While it wasn't the epitome of a balanced diet, my health numbers were fine, so I stuck with what I enjoyed. For 4 years, I'd lived alone. My wife had left me for another man while I was serving a prison sentence. Since then, I'd embraced solitude, venturing out only for my job as a milling machine operator. The house I lived in had been passed down through generations, from my grandfather to my father and now to me. Officially, I was Nathaniel Johnson III, though I never used the title. My parents had retired to South Carolina, leaving me as the sole occupant, aside from their occasional summer visits. Natalie, my ex-wife, still lived nearby, but our paths never crossed. My property stretched across 92 acres, half of it wooded. The woods were my refuge, where I spent most of my free time either working or wandering. There was a peace in the whispering pines, a balm for the bitterness life had left me with. Even on stormy days, when the wind howled through the trees, I found solace. It seemed to echo the darker thoughts that sometimes clouded my mind. The open fields on the land were leased to a farmer who kept them maintained. Along the west edge of the fields ran a line of sugar maples leading to a small sugar house. 10 acres of maple trees sloped toward it, forming a mature sugar bush that I diligently cared for. In spring, the sap flowed through pipelines to the sugar shack, where it was boiled down into golden syrup, filling the air with its sweet aroma. As I sat reflecting, a sputtering car engine interrupted my thoughts. I looked out the window to see an old vehicle rolling to a stop in the lane leading from the road. Usually, kids used the lane as a secluded hangout, but this car hadn't gone far. A petite woman stepped out, circled the car, and returned carrying a small child in her arms. They started walking toward my house. The woman spotted me standing at the door and walked toward the house with a hesitant yet determined stride. She had curly brown hair, wore snug jeans and a yellow top that fit just a bit too tightly, highlighting her figure, and moved with a kind of understated grace. The child in her arms, a little girl of about 3, was dressed in neat, casual clothes similar to her mother's, their shared appearance making it obvious they were family. As she approached, her expression carried a mix of uncertainty and hope. Her car had broken down at the edge of my property, and she needed to leave it there for a while. The narrow dirt road leading through the woods could still accommodate other vehicles, so she thought it wouldn't be a problem. Her immediate concern, however, was the distance to town, about 3 miles, and the challenge of making the trek, especially with her young daughter in tow. At this hour, the road wasn't likely to see much traffic, and most vehicles passing through would be heading away from town. The little girl grew restless and began to fuss. Her mother tried to soothe her, promising they'd find food when they reached town, but with 3 miles to cover and the child's hunger mounting, it was clear they would need something sooner. I invited them inside, offering to put together a quick meal despite not being prepared for company. Grateful but apologetic, the woman accepted the offer. She introduced herself as Isabel Cosgood and settled at the table, placing the child on her lap. While I prepared eggs and toast, the little girl reached for a small stack of crackers on the table, her hunger making her eager. Isabel gently stopped her, reminding her to wait for the meal. I told her to let the child have some crackers if she was that hungry, and mentioned there was milk in the fridge. As I worked in the kitchen, Isabel glanced around. Her curiosity about the absence of a feminine touch in the house led her to ask about my wife. The question hit a raw nerve. The disarray of the house, dusty surfaces, scattered belongings, and minimal upkeep, made it clear no woman lived here. I explained defensively that I managed the bare essentials, tackling chores only when they became unbearable. To soften the tension, I added that I once kept a reasonably tidy home. Realizing she had touched a sensitive topic, Isabel quickly apologized, assuring me that she hadn't meant to pry. I pulled out 2 frying pans and started cooking. In one, I placed 2 sausage patties and a couple of bacon strips. The other I used to brown 3 slices of buttered bread on both sides. Once the bread was ready, I cracked an egg into the pan, broke the yolk, and pressed the toast into it for a quick, hearty meal. Isabel watched and offered to help, mentioning that her mother used to make something similar. She was excited to share the experience with her daughter, Nora, telling her to save her appetite for the treat. While Isabel cooked the second egg, I tended to the bacon and sausage. When she finished, I told her to eat while it was hot, then prepared the last piece of toast and egg for her plate. By the time we were done, night had fully settled, and it was clear that Isabel and her child wouldn't make it to town. Without transportation and nowhere to stay, they had little choice. I suggested they spend the night in one of the upstairs bedrooms. The linens might be stale, but it was the best I could offer. I explained that I'd be leaving soon for my night shift and wouldn't return until morning. They'd have the place to themselves and could lock the door after I left. Isabel was surprised at my willingness to trust a stranger, especially one I knew so little about. I shrugged off her concern, pointing out that her broken-down car wasn't going anywhere. She had shared her name, and she was clearly a decent person. Clean, respectful, and with a child to care for. None of my possessions mattered much, and my heart, I admitted, had grown too cold to risk being hurt again. I left her to her thoughts and retreated to my room to prepare for work, shutting the door behind me. As I changed into my work clothes, frustration crept in. Why had I let them in? Isabel wasn't as striking as my ex-wife, but there was a warmth in her smile, a neighborly familiarity that caught me off guard. She had a friendly demeanor, and her daughter was undeniably adorable. I tried to push the thoughts aside, but they lingered as I heard her climbing the stairs. I checked the clock and realized I'd lingered too long, lost in thought. I called out to let her know I was leaving and wished her good night. From the top of the stairs, she thanked me, adding that she didn't believe my heart was as cold as I claimed. She thought there might still be some warmth hidden beneath the surface. I didn't respond and headed to work. Operating machines had become second nature to me, a skill I picked up during my time in prison. 4 years ago, I had been sentenced to 3 to 5 years, but served just over 2 before being released. The charge stemmed from an incident where I lost control. My wife, Natalie, had been unfaithful, and I took my anger out on the man she was with. While lying in my prison bunk, I often questioned why I didn't confront her instead. Maybe she anticipated that too, as she quickly filed for and received a restraining order after the incident. Before my incarceration, I had worked as a bus driver. On the day everything unraveled, I was covering a route for a sick colleague. During a stop, I spotted Natalie entering a motel. When her car was still there an hour later, I parked the bus and waited. My passengers were confused, but I silenced their questions with a sharp tone. 10 minutes later, the motel door opened, and a man stepped out. Rage overtook me. I dragged him to the ground and unleashed everything I had. He was larger than me, but my fury gave me the upper hand. Natalie ran out, screaming for me to stop, but she couldn't leave with my bus blocking her car. By the time I was done, the man was barely conscious. Natalie, realizing she couldn't escape, retreated to the bus, hoping to stay safe among the passengers. Several of them called the police as I climbed back into the driver's seat. I resumed the route, telling the remaining passengers to signal when they reached their stop. By the time the police intercepted the bus, most had gotten off. Natalie, panicked and cornered, clung to the safety of the remaining riders. In the aftermath, I lost my job for abandoning the bus schedule, though I argued I'd fulfilled my responsibilities by continuing the route. The attack cost me my freedom for a time, but I didn't regret making the man pay for his actions. His knee was so badly damaged, it required replacement. A small victory in a situation that had cost me everything. During my 6th month in prison, I was notified about a civil lawsuit filed against me by the man I had attacked. He was demanding $2 million for the injuries I inflicted. The absurdity of it made me laugh. I was a former bus driver with no assets worth suing over. Soon after, word got back to me that the man had been hospitalized for another knee replacement, following a beating by unknown individuals. Rumors spread that I had orchestrated the attack from my cell, but no evidence supported this claim. Faced with intimidation and fear for his health, he dropped the lawsuit. I hadn't spoken to Natalie since the incident that led to my imprisonment. She lingered in the back of my mind, though I tried to suppress those thoughts. We had met in Boston shortly after I returned from the service. I attended a dance honoring veterans, dressed in my uniform, and she caught my eye immediately. She was tall, slender, and carried herself with polished elegance. Her well-maintained appearance reflected her independent wealth. By the end of the evening, we were mutually captivated, and I postponed my trip home by 3 weeks to spend time with her. Eventually, she followed me back to my small hometown, claiming she had always dreamed of farm life. Reality hit hard when she realized the farm couldn't financially sustain us, even after my parents retired and moved south. The physical labor and limited income wore on her, and I moved us into town, taking a bus driving job to make ends meet. Her dissatisfaction grew, and the divorce came swiftly after I caught her with another man. I gladly signed the papers, wanting nothing more to do with her. Thanks to my lawyer, the farm remained mine, and Natalie walked away with little. She seemed unbothered given her wealth and the financial support of her new partner, Nicholas Grisholm. During my incarceration, I learned a valuable trade: operating computer-guided milling machines. The prison work program offered training, and I applied myself fully. By the time I was released, I was skilled enough to secure a job in my hometown, where such expertise was in demand. The factory manager, himself no stranger to marital betrayal, hired me after I passed a skills test. Working the night shift suited me. I preferred staying out of the public eye and avoiding unnecessary attention. That night at the mill, my mind wandered. Much of the work involved monitoring the machine after setup, leaving time for reflection. My thoughts shifted from the man I had beaten to the unexpected guests I'd taken in, Isabel and her daughter Nora. Isabel seemed young, likely in her mid-20s, though her composure suggested maturity. Her calm acceptance of her situation struck me as unusual, almost serene. I found myself curious about her story. On the way home, I stopped to buy groceries. The house barely had enough food for me, let alone 3 people. I caught myself wondering if Isabel might stay a while. The idea of having someone to talk to and simply share a meal with was oddly appealing. It had been years since I felt anything close to companionship. The scent of coffee greeted me as I stepped inside. Isabel was setting a cup on the table when I hung my cap by the door. She had made pancakes, though she admitted uncertainty about the quality of the baking powder, which was long expired. It didn't matter. The syrup, made from my own trees, was fresh and perfect. As we ate, she asked about my time alone. I explained that while I had lived alone for 2 years, the 2 years prior were spent in prison. Her curiosity turned to the reason for my incarceration, and I assured her I hadn't harmed Natalie. My anger had been directed solely at her lover. Isabel's reaction was surprising. She commended me for standing up for myself, even recounting her own revenge on her cheating ex's lover by yanking out a clump of hair. Her candidness made me laugh. "Well," I said, "aren't we quite the pair?" Laughter filled the room, sparking a contagious joy. Even little Nora, amused by the sound of our laughter, began tapping her feet against the table leg, giggling along. It struck me then that it was the first time in over a year I'd laughed like that. The sensation was refreshing, almost foreign, and it felt good. Breakfast had been delicious. Isabel had made pancakes, bacon, and sausage, and as she carried the dishes to the sink, I asked about her plans. She explained that she had a job interview in town later that day. An older woman was looking for a roommate and had offered to watch Nora once Isabel secured work. In the meantime, she'd help out around the woman's house to earn her keep. Her biggest challenge now was finding a way into town. Curious, I asked Isabel her age. She was 23, which surprised me given how composed and mature she seemed. I shared that I was 28, though life had worn me down to the point of feeling much older. Our brief exchange turned reflective, leading me to ask a bold question. Would she consider working for me? I explained that I could pay her to keep house and care for Nora, emphasizing that I wasn't looking for anything beyond professional help. I mentioned the car sitting unused in my barn, which she could drive while hers was being repaired. Additionally, I offered to teach her gardening to keep her occupied in her spare time. Isabel seemed uncertain, hesitant to commit, but I reassured her there were no hidden expectations. My life upstairs had been untouched for months, and I intended to keep it that way. I suggested she think it over while I caught some sleep, promising to discuss it further at lunch. Isabel asked if she could call her mother and explore the property. I agreed, even offering references from my Christmas card list, though I joked that calling them would likely bring a parade of curious visitors to meet her. With a smile, I thanked her for breakfast and retired to bed. By noon, I was up, cleaned, and ready to tackle her car issue. I opened the barn doors and backed out a Ford Escort that had barely been used. Isabel joined me outside, marveling at the car's pristine condition. I explained its history, purchased for my ex-wife just before I caught her cheating, and offered it for her use until her car was fixed. She accepted with gratitude. We came up with a plan to move her broken-down car into the barn using my tractor. I would tow it onto the barn floor where a friend could assess whether it was worth fixing. If repairs were too costly, selling it for scrap might be her best option. Isabel agreed, though she seemed hesitant at first. Over lunch, she decided to accept my housekeeping job, and we agreed on terms. I paid her in advance from a stash of cash I kept in the cupboard. She remarked on my trust, pointing out that I had just met her and was already giving her access to both my money and my car. I shrugged it off, explaining that material things weren't what I valued most. The response seemed to strike a chord, but she didn't press further. We spent the afternoon moving her car and then went for a walk in the woods. Nora was thrilled to ride on the tractor as we towed the car into the barn. It didn't quite make it all the way in, so I nudged it into place with the tractor bucket. Afterward, we strolled down the wooded path at the edge of my property, with me carrying Nora on my shoulders when she grew tired. Her giggles made the experience more enjoyable than I'd expected, and for the first time in years, I felt a connection to another person. That evening, Isabel cooked dinner: steak, mashed potatoes, carrots, and cake for dessert. The meal was simple but satisfying, a rare treat to have someone else preparing food in my home. Afterward, I rested for a couple of hours before my night shift, though my thoughts remained on Isabel. She was a mystery, revealing little about herself beyond that one comment about pulling her husband's lover's hair. As I lay on my bed, I considered something that had unsettled me earlier. While I was supposedly asleep, Isabel had wandered outside and had also rummaged through my desk and even my nightstand. It could have been mere curiosity, but the intrusion nagged at me. For now, I decided to give her the benefit of the doubt. Time, I figured, would reveal her intentions. Before heading to work that evening, I left early to make a call to Neil, an old friend I trusted. I explained the situation. There was a car sitting in my barn, belonging to a woman I'd recently hired as my housekeeper. She came with her little daughter, Nora, who had brought an unexpected light into my life. However, I was growing suspicious. I had noticed the woman, Isabel, had gone through my personal belongings, likely assuming I wouldn't notice. I asked Neil to inspect her car on Saturday, as I suspected it might have been tampered with intentionally. I also mentioned her request to make a phone call and asked him to find out whom she had called, if possible. Neil, ever practical, asked who I thought might be behind it. I admitted I wasn't sure, but doubted it was tied to my past trouble with Nicholas Grissom, the man whose affair with my ex-wife had landed me in prison. Grisholm had wealth and resources, but I couldn't see him still caring enough about Natalie to come after me. Neil reminded me, however, that Grisholm might harbor lingering resentment, not only because of his damaged knees, but also because I had escaped further repercussions after he dropped the civil suit. The rest of the week was surprisingly peaceful. Isabel proved capable in the house, and my meals were timely and well-prepared. This freed me up to spend more time outdoors. I worked on cutting and hauling firewood from the trees I had felled the previous fall for my sugaring operation. Nora quickly became my little shadow, eager to join me in the woods. Isabel pitched in too, helping with the lighter tasks, and even learning to drive the tractor loaded with wood. It had been years since I'd spent this much time with a woman, and I occasionally caught myself watching Isabel. I was careful not to let her notice, but her presence stirred something in me I hadn't felt in a long time. For now, though, I kept my emotions in check, content to enjoy the moment. On Saturday, Neil called me down to the barn after examining the car. He confirmed my suspicions. The vehicle had been deliberately disabled, with 2 wires disconnected, a clear indication of tampering. He had also found a crumpled receipt in the car's door pocket, issued to a company called Ace Investigations in Rutland, Vermont. Isabel's phone call had been to a Mrs. Anderson, also located near Rutland. Neil concluded that Isabel was likely working as a spy, though for whom or why remained unclear. The news was disheartening. I had grown attached to Nora, and even Isabel had become a pleasant part of my life. Despite my suspicions, I decided to remain quiet for now. Neil suggested keeping my friends in the loop in case I needed their help again, but he warned me not to risk landing back in prison. Whatever happened next, it had to be handled discreetly. Over time, my life began to change. After years of isolation, Nora's presence softened me. To her, I was simply a kind figure in her world, and I couldn't help but respond in kind. Isabel, too, started to feel like more than just a housekeeper. Though I still avoided people, My desire to stay on the farm was now driven by a need to remain close to them. Isabel, however, wasn't without her mysteries. I occasionally caught her stealing glances at me, her expression tinged with sadness. It was clear something weighed on her, but she kept it hidden behind her polite and friendly demeanor. As planting season began, I arranged for a plot of land to be plowed by the local farmer who used my fields. Nora was thrilled to dig for worms in the freshly turned soil, and we took her to the lake to fish. She was ecstatic when we caught a dozen perch, and she insisted on helping clean them. Her pride in gutting her first fish was palpable, though Isabel was less thrilled when Nora returned with stained hands. Still, her pride softened any objections. One day we made a trip to Agüe for seeds and plants, returning with far more than we had space for. Isabel and Nora had carefully marked out rows in the garden while I slept, and the next morning we planted everything together. Over the following weeks, Nora's excitement grew as the first radishes sprouted, and even more so when she tasted the first one we deemed ready to eat. Life on the farm had taken a turn I hadn't expected. Despite lingering questions about Isabel's motives, I found myself enjoying the rhythm of shared meals, outdoor work, and small moments of joy with her and Nora. For the first time in years, my world felt a little less empty. Over the weeks, Isabel and I settled into a comfortable rhythm, though I couldn't ignore the nagging truth. She wasn't here for the reasons she claimed. I kept my distance emotionally, careful not to show the affection that was steadily growing. It was a different story with Nora. I poured my heart into being there for her, cherishing the innocence and joy she brought to my life. Together, we started to resemble a family. Weekends often meant movie outings, and breakfast at McDonald's became a twice-weekly ritual. 3 weeks after Isabel started working for me, I suggested she treat herself. I was heading into town for a haircut and offered to pay for her to get her hair done. At first, she hesitated, mentioning she couldn't afford it, but I insisted. Her long hair seemed like a bother to her, and I suggested a shorter style with a perm, adding that it would highlight her freckles, a feature I admitted I liked, even if most men didn't. After some thought, she agreed to make an appointment. As time passed, it became apparent that Isabel had been through nearly every personal paper in my house. Despite my suspicions, I said nothing, preferring to observe and wait. One Saturday in July, Neil stopped by for a beer, and we took a walk through the woods. During our conversation, he mentioned seeing Nicholas Grisholm entering the Ace Detective Agency earlier that week. Grisholm's sour demeanor upon leaving hinted that things weren't going as planned. I suspected Isabel's time here was nearing its end. The end came sooner than expected. When Neil and I returned from our walk, Isabel was hanging up the phone. She announced that a sick friend had called her for help and that she would be leaving immediately. I hid my disappointment, acknowledging that friends sometimes needed support. I turned to Neil and asked him to back her car out of the barn while I said my goodbyes to Nora. Nora clung to me, crying and refusing to let go. I held her tightly, overwhelmed by the thought of losing her. Turning to Isabel, I admitted that while I was glad to part ways with the last woman in my life, I didn't feel the same about her. I asked if I could hug her, knowing it might be my last chance. Isabel stepped into my arms, and for a moment we held on to each other, as if we didn't want to let go. Through tears, I spoke of the bond we had formed over the past few months. I confessed that we both had secrets, but believed that sharing them could bring us closer. I promised to reach out soon, reminding her that someone had to be around to harvest the garden we had planted together. Nora's small arms wrapped around my neck, and I kissed her goodbye. A week later, as I returned home, I saw Natalie standing by her car in my driveway. She wasted no time in bringing up Nicholas, who had been beaten up again and suffered a broken arm. She implied I might have been involved, though I calmly reminded her I had no reason to be. I added that if she truly believed I was responsible, she should have me investigated. Natalie seemed unsure whether Nicholas's renewed interest in me was her doing, but her warning was clear. Nicholas wouldn't stop until he found a way to put me back in prison. His bruised ego, combined with his wealth, made him a persistent threat. I reminded her of the damage he had caused, not just to me but to my family. Stealing another man's wife was a humiliation he never acknowledged, and my reaction had cost me everything: my job, my wife, and my reputation. I was now a felon, and the shame of that weighed heavily on my parents, who had once thought highly of her. Natalie had no response, her expression a mix of regret and frustration. But her presence confirmed what I already knew. Nicholas's vendetta wasn't over, and I had to remain vigilant. I was frustrated, sick of everything revolving around Natalie and her husband Nicholas. I needed to address this mess directly. Before I could hold back, I let out a bitter comment, my annoyance spilling over. "Natalie, you're looking well. The wealthy lifestyle suits you," I said, unable to hide the sarcasm. Her response was unexpected. "Nathaniel, why didn't you come after me instead of Nicholas? I was the one who betrayed you. If you'd confronted me, I would have felt guilty, and it all might have ended there. But Nicholas can't let it go. What sparked this latest drama?" I told her what I'd heard, that Nicholas had been investigating me again. I made it clear that whatever was happening to him was his own doing. I reminded her that my mother had taught me never to strike a woman, so she'd been spared my wrath. That didn't mean I didn't harbor resentment. My hatred for her betrayal remained. She warned me, saying Nicholas had the money and power to have me liquidated. Her words didn't faze me. I told her plainly that death didn't scare me much anymore and even joked grimly about how his actions could ultimately cause his own downfall. Natalie seemed to struggle to decipher whether my words were a threat. I pressed further, suggesting sarcastically that maybe she'd benefit from Nicholas eliminating me, as it would leave her a wealthy widow. She snapped, telling me to stop. For the first time, she expressed regret, saying she hadn't intended to cause so much trouble. She believed things might have turned out differently if I hadn't caught her and Nicholas together that day. She claimed she'd been planning to leave me anyway and thought I would have granted her a divorce, albeit grudgingly. I admitted I didn't know how I would have reacted back then, but I reiterated that I wasn't going after Nicholas. He was the one coming after me. I suggested she and Nicholas move far away and start fresh, perhaps even start a family. She seemed taken aback by my sincerity, asking if I truly meant it. I assured her I did. Without another word, Natalie got into her car and drove off, not looking back. Exhausted from the encounter and lack of sleep, I went inside and collapsed without even eating. The next day I woke near noon, my mind lingering on Nora and Isabel. I missed them both deeply. Nora's boundless affection had brought light to my life, and Isabel had shown hints of longing for me when we said goodbye. Should I reach out to her? Knowing she had worked for an investigator, I worried she might have seen too much of life's darkness to want someone like me in her life. Later, I retrieved the mail and found a large envelope with a Rutland postmark. Inside was a dossier on Isabel Cosgood, including her full name, address, and phone number. It detailed her job at the detective agency and her connection to the investigation into me. The file even included a bill for the work done on my case. I learned that Nora's grandmother cared for her while Isabel worked alongside her brother at the agency. Taking a chance, I called the number listed, hoping Nora would answer. Instead, an older woman picked up. She introduced herself as Mrs. Anderson and confirmed that both Isabel and Nora were struggling with the separation. Nora prayed for me each night, and Isabel was quieter than ever. Mrs. Anderson admitted she had suspected the investigation would cause trouble, but hadn't expected it to hit Isabel so hard, especially since it affected Nora so deeply. Mrs. Anderson asked if I'd figured out Isabel's connection to the investigation. I assured her I had, and then asked for a favor. I wanted to meet with both Isabel and her brother. She agreed, offering to host me on Sunday at noon. Before we hung up, she hinted that Nora would be thrilled to hear I'd be visiting. According to her, I had become a father figure for the little girl, a role she had never experienced before. Afterward, I called Neil and shared what I'd learned from the dossier and my conversation with Mrs. Anderson. I also told him about Natalie's visit and her belief that Nicholas would never stop trying to ruin me. She'd implied that Nicholas's wealth and pride made him relentless. Neil suggested we keep tabs on Nicholas. He mentioned that Nicholas and Natalie often dined at the New England house and proposed we watch for them there. If they showed up, he'd let me know so we could act accordingly. I agreed. I'll be ready if the time comes. After a long day, I lay down for my evening rest, my mind heavy with thoughts about the tangled mess involving my ex-wife, Natalie, and her husband, Nicholas. Since leaving prison, I had lived in a state of near isolation, venturing out only for work. But I couldn't let this simmering tension dominate my life any longer. It was time to confront the situation head-on and reclaim some semblance of control. I couldn't rely on my friends to shield me forever. They had lives to lead, just as I needed to move forward with mine. I made a reservation at the New England house for the following evening. Regardless of whether Nicholas and Natalie showed up, I had to eat, and it wouldn't be a wasted effort. As expected, the call came confirming their presence. When I arrived at the restaurant, I was directed to a table where 9 of my old military friends were seated, strategically positioned near an alcove where Natalie and Nicholas dined alone. The setup effectively boxed them in, ensuring a private yet unignorable confrontation. Natalie spotted me first. Her face turned pale as she whispered to Nicholas, who froze upon noticing us. He avoided eye contact, glancing nervously at the men surrounding their secluded space. Natalie attempted to collect herself, taking a bite of food that caused her to choke and cough. She moved as if to rise, but I gave a subtle shake of my head, signaling her to stay put. She complied without protest. The waitress came to take our drink orders, and I offered to buy a round for the couple in the alcove. Both declined. Throughout the meal, I engaged my friends in casual conversation, asking about their families and careers. I spoke loudly enough for Nicholas and Natalie to hear, knowing they were listening. When dessert came, I again offered to treat the couple, but they refused once more. When the checks arrived, I picked up theirs, handing my credit card to the waitress. "These are friends of mine," I said coolly. "I'll cover their bill." After dinner, I addressed Natalie directly. "Would you mind switching seats with me so I can have a word with Nicholas?" Hesitant, she eventually complied, moving to the chair I had just vacated. I took her seat across from Nicholas, who sat stiffly, refusing to meet my gaze. "So, Nicholas," I began, "I see you've hurt your arm. How's it feeling?" "You know damn well it's painful," he snapped. "And you caused it. What do you want? Who are these men?" I leaned back, letting the tension simmer. "First, let's clear something up. I didn't break your arm. You did that to yourself, but let me tell you a story." I paused, gauging his reaction, though he still wouldn't look at me. "When I was 18, I joined the military. A kid, really. I ended up serving overseas with the men you see here. They're all a bit older than me, but we bonded over shared hardships. Back then, they were all bitter about their failed marriages, each having been cheated on and divorced. I told them I'd marry someone better, someone who wouldn't betray me. When I married Natalie, I thought I'd proven them wrong. Turns out they were right. I let the silence linger before continuing. One time during our deployment, I spotted an IED on the road ahead. If I hadn't noticed it, God knows how many lives would have been lost. These men credit me with saving their lives. We lost touch after I left the service, but they rallied around me when I went to prison. Tonight is the first time we've all been together in years." I leaned forward. "They think they owe me, Nicholas, and they don't take kindly to people who mess with me." He shifted uncomfortably. I pressed on. "Let's be honest. Natalie is half the reason for the mess between us. She cheated and admits it freely. But you couldn't let things rest after I confronted you. You had to escalate, pushing for my prosecution and seeing me sent to prison. Then you attempted a civil suit, but dropped it after being warned. You should have listened." Nicholas remained silent, so I continued. "Now, I hear you've been investigating me again. What are you hoping to find? Evidence to blame me for your misfortunes? Every step you take only brings you closer to more trouble. Maybe it's time to move on. Natalie is still a beautiful woman, and I believe she loves you. Ask yourself this. Would you feel the same if she weren't so pretty? You need to think about what's really driving your actions." I stood, signaling the end of the conversation. "I've said what I needed to. Think it over and let me know your decision by Saturday at noon. It's time for me to move forward with my life, and I suggest you do the same." I walked away, leaving Natalie in her former seat and Nicholas with his head bowed. Outside, my friends dispersed silently, their presence alone having sent the intended message. No thanks were needed. They understood. I drove off, feeling a mix of resolve and exhaustion, knowing the confrontation was just one step toward reclaiming my future. That morning, after a long night at work, I headed home hoping for some much-needed sleep. Rest didn't come easily. I tossed and turned for over an hour before finally drifting off. The pounding on my door jolted me awake. Groggy, I shuffled to the kitchen and peered out the glass. A taxi was pulling out of my driveway, leaving behind 2 suitcases on the walkway. When I opened the door, Natalie stood leaning against the side of the house. She looked battered, a bruise darkening her cheek and one hand holding her ribs for support. Her movements were unsteady as she asked to come in, explaining that she needed to talk. I helped her inside and eased her into a chair, noticing her wince as she sat. She admitted Nicholas had been drinking and hit her, though she didn't think anything was broken. I poured her a cup of the black coffee I had left over from breakfast, and she sipped it gratefully. She wasted no time diving into her story. "Nicholas has completely lost it," she began. "That talk you had with him in front of your friends humiliated him. He's been seething ever since. Last night, he accused me of wanting to come back to you. When I denied it, he lashed out and hit me. After he passed out on the couch, I packed my things and left." I remained silent, letting her continue. "I've decided to leave him," she said. There's no love left between us if there ever was any. I withdrew most of my money from the bank this morning, but I can't use my car. Nicholas smashed the windshield during one of his fits. I noticed you still have the car you bought for me years ago. I'd like to buy it from you for the full amount you paid when it was new. I even have a cashier's check ready. I studied her for a moment. Where are you planning to go? I asked. Florida, she replied. But first, I'm stopping to see your parents. I want to apologize to them for all the pain I've caused. Maybe it'll help you hate me a little less. I need to leave town before Nicholas finds me. He's been making terrible threats against you and me. Without another word, I retrieved the car's title from my lockbox, signed it over to her, and handed her the keys. The car's full of gas, I said. It's still practically new. Just keep the plates on until you can get replacements in Florida. Are you sure you're okay to drive? She nodded. I'll be fine, but you need to watch your back. Nicholas is unraveling, and his hatred for you runs deep. Believe it or not, I haven't been happy with him either. Guilt over how I treated you has eaten at me for years. I thought I was trading up, but I've paid for that mistake every day since. Her words didn't soften my stance. Natalie, my mistake was losing control and beating Nicholas when I caught you two. I should have divorced you and walked away. Instead, my actions gave him the upper hand, and I've been paying for it ever since. You need to leave before he sobers up and comes looking for you. He blames me for everything, but the truth is, both of you are to blame. Tears welled in her eyes as she stood to leave. You're right, and I'm sorry, Nathaniel, for everything. I don't expect forgiveness. I won't be coming back, so goodbye. I placed her suitcases in the trunk while she adjusted the driver's seat. She gave a small wave before driving away, leaving a trail of dust on the gravel road. I skipped lunch and tried to get some sleep, but it didn't last long. The sound of a car screeching into my yard yanked me from bed. Moments later, the unmistakable roar of an engine spinning out filled the air, followed by the slam of a car door. I didn't need to look to know who it was. Nicholas Grisholm had arrived. The front door banged open with such force that the glass shattered. I stayed quiet, listening as Nicholas stormed through the house, shouting my name. He searched every room, even flinging open closets, and then stomped upstairs. I could hear him rifling through more rooms, his frustration building with each empty discovery. I didn't own a cell phone to call the police, and there wasn't time to use the landline. As Nicholas thundered down the stairs, I slipped out the back door and headed for the barn. Why didn't I confront him? Simple. He was bigger and angrier than me. The only reason I'd bested him years ago was sheer rage and the element of surprise. Now, he had the upper hand, and I had no means to defend myself. My tools had been confiscated after my felony conviction, leaving me without even a basic deterrent. My only option was to stay out of sight and hope he'd leave. The morning after a restless night, I tried to catch some sleep, but was interrupted by the sound of destruction inside my house. Nicholas was still inside, smashing things. The noise lasted for about 10 minutes before I heard his footsteps heading outside. From the barn, I watched as he stared at the outbuildings, seemingly deciding that Natalie wouldn't have hidden there. He stormed to his car, peeled out of the driveway, and lost control, sending the vehicle into a ditch and smashing it against a tree. I returned to the house, grabbed the phone, and called the police. Calmly, I explained my identity, location, and the situation with Nicholas. The dispatcher assured me that a patrol car would arrive shortly and asked me to stay on the line in case anything else happened. I could see Nicholas through the window, struggling to free his car. After several minutes, he managed to get back onto the driveway and sped away recklessly, narrowly missing an oncoming car. I reported this near collision to the dispatcher. A minute later, Nicholas disappeared from view. The dispatcher asked for background information, and I briefly explained my history with him, carefully omitting Natalie's earlier visit. Bringing up marital disputes wouldn't help the situation. Before ending the call, I requested an officer to document the damage Nicholas had done to my home. Exhausted but unable to do more, I went back to bed. My kitchen was a wreck, chairs broken, cupboards damaged, and dishes smashed to pieces. Nicholas's rampage had left a chaotic mess. I woke again when a police car arrived. Heavy knocks at the door pulled me from sleep, and I stumbled to let them in. The officers parked near the driveway, examining the deep tire marks Nicholas had left behind. Inside, they asked if he'd been apprehended. There was a long pause before one officer responded grimly, "Yes, we caught up to him, but he's dead." Less than 15 minutes after your call, he drove off the bridge at the bottom of the hill. His car hit the railing, went airborne, and landed upside down in the brook below. A tree snapped during the fall, piercing the windshield. We were almost at the bridge and saw the whole thing. I didn't press for more details. The officers surveyed the damage in my home, taking notes. They asked about my history with Nicholas and whether I had seen Natalie recently. I admitted she'd stopped by earlier, warning me that Nicholas was behaving erratically. She claimed they'd argued before he passed out on the couch. The officers requested her contact information. I explained that I didn't have her phone number, but believed she was driving to Florida. I told them she had purchased a car from me earlier that morning and provided a description of the vehicle, including the license plates, which still bore my tags. After the officers left, I pieced together a quick meal, skipped dinner, and lay down for an hour before my night shift. At work, my thoughts circled back to Natalie and Nicholas. I couldn't deny feeling relieved that Nicholas was gone. Natalie had hinted that living with him had been difficult, but my sympathy was limited. His actions had derailed my life, and now, perhaps, I could finally move forward. I decided that my next step would involve reaching out to Isabel and Nora. Whether I could salvage a relationship with them depended on what Isabel had uncovered during her investigation. If her findings had turned her against me, there might be nothing left to pursue. I resolved to wait a few more days before contacting her. That night, I read a brief article about Nicholas's fatal accident. The authorities were inspecting his car to determine why it had veered into the bridge railing. After my shift, I called my mother to share the news. The conversation stretched on as she asked for details, and I promised to explain more during her upcoming visit. My parents were planning a trip here in 2 weeks, which gave me something to look forward to. That day, I slept deeply, catching up on much-needed rest. Over my evening meal, I wondered whether the police had informed Natalie about Nicholas's death. Despite everything, she was likely to feel the weight of his loss and of the chaos they had both left behind. I decided to call Mrs. Anderson, but the call went straight to voicemail. I left a message asking her to have Isabel check the local papers, the Brattleboro Reformer and the Rutland Herald. Both carried news of Nicholas Grisholm's death, and I thought Isabel might find it relevant given her time working for me. Before ending the message, I asked if the invitation for Sunday still stood. That evening, while eating a bacon and egg sandwich, the phone rang. It was Isabel. "Hi," she began. "Hi yourself," I replied. "How's Nora? I miss her." "She's good," Isabel said, her voice warm. "She misses you and keeps asking when we'll move back in with you." I chuckled. "I've been wondering the same thing. Is your current job better than working here? If it's about money, I can make it worth your while." "No," she said firmly. "I hate what I'm doing now. I loved working for you." "Is that so? How much do you really know about me, Isabel?" I asked. "I hear you've been digging around?" She laughed softly. "I lived with you for 3 months and must be the worst detective ever. I learned nothing about you except what was on the surface." "Maybe there's more," I teased. "But it's buried deep. I could tell you, but then I'd have to marry you to keep you from testifying." There was a pause before she responded. "Nathaniel, don't joke about that. I suspect you already know plenty about me." "I do," I admitted. "I know about your college boyfriend who left when you got pregnant. I know you dropped out to have Nora, that your father passed away, and you've struggled to find stable work since. Your brother and your mom have been your main support. And your mom told me she invited me for Sunday dinner. Is that okay with you?" "Oh, yes," she said quickly. "But we haven't told Nora yet. She'd never let us rest if she knew. Can you come tomorrow instead?" "I wish I could," I said. "But Nicholas trashed my house before his accident, and I need to put things back together. I'll come early Sunday, I promise." She sighed, but agreed. "I'm anxious to see you." I whistled my way to work that night, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. But an even bigger surprise awaited me the next morning. Isabel's car was parked outside the house when I arrived. As soon as I stepped out of my vehicle, Nora came bounding down the steps and threw herself into my arms. She showered me with kisses, which I happily returned. Isabel appeared in the doorway, a coffee cup in hand and a radiant smile on her face. She set the cup down and walked straight into my arms. I held her tightly, reluctant to let go. "I've wanted to do that for so long," she whispered. "Me too," I admitted. She pulled back slightly. "Drink your coffee. I've made eggs and bacon. I figured after you told Mom about the mess Nicholas made cleaning up his woman's work. I'm your housekeeper after all. We'll discuss pay later." Her voice rose playfully as she called out, "Mom, come meet Nathaniel Johnson III, the best boss I've ever had. Nora's in love with him, so I'll have to keep an eye on her." Her chatter filled the room as Nora climbed into my lap. I couldn't get up to greet Mrs. Anderson, who entered with a smile that mirrored Isabel's. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Johnson," she said warmly. "Please call me Nathaniel," I replied. "Everyone else does." She nodded. I came to meet the man both my girls are so taken with. I hope you don't mind. Not at all. I'm glad to have you here, though I think Isabel might put you to work. I've got my hands full with this little angel. Nora giggled, wiggling in delight. Over breakfast, I realized I was ready to propose to Isabel. When she asked how much I knew about her family, I handed her the dossier I had received. As Isabel flipped through the pages, her eyes widened. You figured out the name I gave you was my mom's maiden name, didn't you? I nodded as she stopped suddenly. Oh my God, she exclaimed. You even know my panty size. How? I laughed. A friend of mine happened to be behind you in line at Walmart while you were checking out. She stared at me. How many of these friends do you have? My tone grew serious. That's something I'd only share if we were married, but I'd love to tell you someday. Her expression softened. That almost sounds like a proposal. Would you say yes if it was? She hesitated, then smiled. Oh, Nathaniel, I want to say yes so badly. Just give me a little more time. Take all the time you need, I assured her. She reached for my hand. Love and marriage are definitely on my mind. I think we're halfway there, but there are parts of my past I'm not proud of, and you'll have to accept them. Still, my future looks brighter now than it has in years, and I owe that to you. Later, as I prepared to rest, I asked Nora if she wanted to nap with me. Her face lit up, and as she settled beside me, I thought about how much joy she brought into my life. For the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. Just before I woke that morning, I'd assured myself there was nothing in my past that could resurface to trouble me. By then, Nora had already gotten up, and I overheard voices in the kitchen, one of them unmistakably Natalie's. Reluctantly, I knew I had to face her, despite Isabel being in the house. Nora ran to me as soon as I entered the room, demanding to be picked up. In the kitchen, Natalie's tear-streaked face betrayed the weight of the news she carried. The police had contacted her to inform her of Nicholas's death, a message she hadn't received until the morning after she left. Her grief seemed genuine as she expressed regret for the chaos her actions had caused in my life. As we talked, the truth became clearer. The injuries Nicholas suffered weren't of my doing, but likely the work of men who felt indebted to me from our time in combat. They'd seen themselves as protectors, though their actions only deepened the tragedy of the situation. Natalie acknowledged her role in the chain of events, admitting that her infidelity had set everything in motion. She planned to inherit significant wealth and intended to move on with her life, leaving behind the wreckage of her choices. With that, the dark chapter of my life came to an end. It had taken 5 years, but for the first time, my future felt brighter. Isabel and I spent a quiet weekend reflecting on our pasts. She confessed that her initial arrival had been orchestrated by her brother, who'd tasked her with investigating me. Though she only intended to stay briefly, her growing feelings for me kept her there. I shared how my friends had stepped in to protect me during my most vulnerable times, though we both agreed their efforts might have worsened Nicholas's downward spiral. The constant pressure and humiliation seemed to have pushed him beyond his limits. At work, I transitioned from the night shift to days and was quickly promoted to lead man, with the promise of a salaried position if I proved myself. My parents visited shortly after, witnessing my proposal to Isabel. We married in a simple courthouse ceremony, followed by a casual barbecue reception at the farm, where Nora proudly harvested potatoes for the feast. Later, Isabel's brother admitted that his investigation into my past had yielded nothing Nicholas could exploit. He suggested I cultivate relationships with local detectives, as they could provide valuable insight into investigative techniques. The advice was sound, though I made a mental note to avoid the taboo subject of Nicholas Grisholm in future discussions. Over time, Natalie faded from our lives, apart from a cryptic Christmas card each year. The postmark was always unreadable, leaving her whereabouts a mystery. Now, as spring arrives, life feels stable and sweet. The first syrup of the season is ready to be drawn from the sugar pan, and Isabel and Nora are at my side, savoring the moment. Their presence is a reminder of how far I've come and the simple joys that make the future seem so promising.